A few months ago, I previewed Dark Souls Archthrones here on this channel. A total overhaul mod for Dark Souls 3, back then I said that Archthrones was shaping up to be one of the best fan creations I've ever seen. The Archthrones team dropped an extensive demo back on March 15th, and after playing it quite a bit over spring break, I'm happy to report that for the most part, the demo lives up to those lofty expectations. Featuring a series of lovingly restructured areas from the original game, cleverly ported movesets, and reskinned characters from Sekiro and Elden Ring, plus a new storyline set in a unique part of the Dark Souls timeline, Archthrones is far and away the most impressive mod I've ever played. And that's coming from a guy who sunk close to 100 hours into the Game of Thrones adaptation of Crusader Kings 2. Though it's by no means perfect, the demo has me really looking forward to the full game, and excited to see what other surprises the developers have in store for us. So let's dive in to my full thoughts on Dark Souls Archthrones. At launch, the demo wasn't so great. The balancing was off, which led to the treks between bonfires being a bit of a slog. Don't get me wrong, if you're a fan of these games, it's probably because you love a good challenge. But there's a difference between the gameplay being difficult and feeling powerless, and the original build was definitely the latter. Even the most basic enemies had surprising amounts of health, and even with my signature strength-heavy build, I wasn't doing much damage at all. Fortunately, the Archthrones team responded very quickly, putting out a patch that rebalanced enemies and damage the following week. I was so impressed by their prompt attention to this. I've seen AAA developers take quite a bit of time to fix major issues with their games, but the mod team jumped in to fix this in record time. With the patch in place, the balance is back to feeling like Dark Souls 3 for me, which is about what I was expecting from the mod. So if you played the demo on release weekend and bounced off it, I highly recommend you go back and try it again. You'll surely have a better experience. With the balancing resolved, it became so much easier for me to appreciate the best thing about Archthrones, the incredible work and dedication that went into recreating some of the series' most iconic levels at a totally different period of the timeline. From the war-torn village, set in the shadow of the High Wall of Lothric, to hide from Dark Souls 2 and the Cathedral of the Deep, the team went to great lengths to reimagine these regions and give us an experience that feels familiar but different at the same time. It was so cool to come back to these maps and see how they adjusted the level designs, where they positioned the bonfires, and how they adapted the imagery to fit their lore. The best region, in my opinion, was the aforementioned Cathedral, which takes some serious inspiration from Bloodborne, my personal favorite Souls game, and how it portrays the deep. They even brought back those damn winter lanterns, which hit me with probably the strangest combination of PTSD and nostalgia I've ever experienced while playing a video game. Speaking of enemies from other games, including them is one of the hallmark features of Archthrones. As you play through the demo, you'll see plenty of enemies from Bloodborne, Sekiro, Elden Ring, and even some bosses, all reskinned to fit the story and gameplay needs of the development team. Most of the time, it works really well and feels like you're at a concert where one of your favorite bands is just firing off their greatest hits. The Bloodborne enemies translate very well. It shares plenty of DNA with Dark Souls 3. But I was really impressed by how well the Sekiro enemies translated over to Archthrones. Their inclusion really increased the difficulty of Hide, which is one of the last areas you're supposed to go to. And once I figured out how to deal with them, fighting these reimagined shinobis was honestly really therapeutic for me. I loved Sekiro, but I struggled with it quite a bit because parrying and precise timing just aren't things I'm very good at. But here in Archthrones, I don't have to be Wolf, the dexterous master of the katana. I can be Albatross, a proud claymore bro who likes to take big hits and deal big damage. Hey there, Genichiro! Remember when you whooped my ass for an entire weekend? Be a shame if I were to show up with a big sword and stagger your ass to hell. And while you're there, be sure to ask Melania how that worked out for her. Seriously, It really is interesting to see these enemies placed in a game where the player can, unlike with Sekiro, adopt a wider variety of playstyles, and I give the developers a ton of credit for not only taking this bold path to add some depth to their game, but doing so in a manner that increases the difficulty at a logical point in the game and reskinning the characters in such a detailed manner. Whether it's the Hyde Knights, the Carthage Swordsmen, or the Armored Warriors of the Deep, the effort and care by the Archthrones team really is impressive. You can say the same about most of the bosses, pretty much all of whom are also ported from other games. Klimp starts out as a Godskin noble and then becomes the One Reborn, and even an adapted version of Godfrey makes an appearance before transforming into an ulcerated tree spirit. But my favorite boss fight was the Angel of Gertrude, who has the Crucible Knight moveset, which not only fit with the level thematically, but seemed not the slightest bit out of place in this reimagined version of Dark Souls 3. In terms of lore, each area has its own well-told environmental story, with Karthus, its bells, and its Necromancer final boss coming off particularly strong. I also loved seeing named characters from Dark Souls lore, like Gertrude and Flynn, voiced by the incredible Vadi Vidya. Aldrich even makes an appearance, and though I was curious to see if we'd get to find out what he looked like before he became a very hungry god eater, this pre-devouring of Gwyndolin form was cool too. The way the deacons summon him to the fight is awesome as well. It's some legit eldritch horror stuff, which really fits with the theme of the Cathedral of the Deep. But unfortunately, Archthrones does have its weak points. As I said earlier, most of the time, the ported enemies come off really well. But there are instances where it's a bit awkward. Jumping was a key feature in Elden Ring, and while you can certainly beat all of those enemies and bosses without it, it still feels like an element is missing from the combat. Because it is. The same is true of Sekiro and its lack of a stamina bar. That's part of what made that game work as well as it did, and while you can compensate for it by just overpowering your enemies like I did, the absence is still noticeable. Our Emissary of Embers, who's intrinsically based on the Unkindled One, also just isn't as fast as the Good Hunter, Wolf, or the Tarnished. Again, you can counteract this through other means, as the Soulsborne series always allows you to do. But sometimes it feels like you're a pitcher who's lost his fastball and needs to trick batters with off-speed stuff to get them out, which isn't particularly fun. But the biggest issue I did have with Archthrones was from a technical perspective. The demo crashed on me quite a few times, usually during loading screens, including one that required a hard restart and caused me to lose over 2 hours worth of footage and my initial victories over the war-torn village's bosses. Needless to say, this was pretty frustrating, and I'm hopeful that the developers will get that end of things worked out when it comes time for the full release. Still, it speaks to how positive my overall feelings were that I continued to play it even after multiple crashes. The demo really is impressive, and with some more time on the bonfire, I think the full release will turn out to be a mod Soulsborne fans will be very happy with. In the meantime, stay tuned for more news and updates on Dark Souls Archthrones. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to Alex Roe for allowing all of us YouTubers to use his awesome Dark Souls remixes for our videos. You can check out all of his music at the link below. Huge shout out to my silver and gold tier channel members and Patreon subscribers, including James Pruitt, Raven Lampkin, Corey Matson, Little Caesar, Reed, and Pathonian, who receive early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.